Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, a tale of champions and challenges. Chapter 1: The Riddle House. In the village of Little Hangleton, the old Riddle House stood atop a hill, its windows boarded and its ivy-covered walls crumbling. Once a majestic manor, it now cast a foreboding shadow over the village, a constant reminder of the grisly murders that had occurred there decades ago. On this particular night, a light flickered in an upstairs window, catching the eye of Frank Bryce, the elderly caretaker. Suspicious, Frank made his way up to investigate, his arthritic knee protesting with each step. As he approached the door, voices drifted out, one high and cold, the other nervous and subservient. Frank leaned in, straining to hear their conversation about a plan. A boy named Harry Potter and a faithful servant. Suddenly, a massive snake slithered past Frank's feet and into the room. The high, cold voice spoke again, this time in a strange, hissing language. Before Frank could react, the door flew open, revealing a sight so terrifying that his scream never left his throat. Miles away, in the bedroom of number 4, Privet Drive, Harry Potter awoke with a start, his scar burning fiercely. Chapter 2: The Scar. Harry sat up, his heart pounding. The dream had been so vivid, the old house, the conversation, the blinding flash of green light. And now, his scar was throbbing, as if someone had pressed a white-hot wire to his forehead. He stumbled to the window, hoping the cool night air would clear his head. As he gazed out at the quiet suburban street, Harry's mind raced. The last time his scar had hurt like this was when Voldemort had been at Hogwarts, but that was impossible now, wasn't it? Harry's eyes fell on a photo of Ron and Hermione on his bedside table. He longed to talk to them, to share his worries. But how could he explain a pain in his scar without sounding foolish? After a moment's hesitation, Harry sat down at his desk and began to write a letter to Sirius, his godfather. If anyone would understand, it would be Sirius. As he penned the letter, detailing his dream and the pain in his scar, Harry felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Whatever this meant, he wouldn't face it alone. Chapter 3: The Invitation. The next morning, as Harry trudged down to breakfast, an unusual sight greeted him. Uncle Vernon, Aunt Petunia, and Dudley were gathered around the kitchen table, a sea of envelopes surrounding them. "Oh, here he is," Uncle Vernon growled as Harry entered. These came for you." Harry approached cautiously, eyeing the pile of letters. His heart leapt as he recognized Ron's untidy scrawl on one envelope, Hermione's neat handwriting on another, and the Hogwarts seal on a third. As he reached for them, Uncle Vernon snatched them away. "Who'd be writing to you?" he sneered. Before Harry could respond, a large barn owl swooped through the open window, dropping a letter right onto Aunt Petunia's perfectly coiffed head. She shrieked, batting at her hair as if the letter might bite. Harry seized the moment of chaos to grab his letters and retreat to his room. Once safely inside, he tore open Ron's letter first. Harry Dadgotheticets, Ireland versus Bulgaria, Monday night. Mom's writing to the Muggles to ask you to stay. They might already have the letter. I don't know how fast Muggle post is. Thought I'd send this with Pig anyway." Excitement bubbled up inside Harry. The Quidditch World Cup. He'd be leaving the Dursleys early, spending the rest of the summer at the Burrow, and attending the biggest wizarding sporting event in the world. As if on cue, Uncle Vernon's bellow echoed up the stairs, "Boy, get down here!" and "OW." Harry bounded down the stairs, a grin spreading across his face. For once, he couldn't wait to talk to his uncle. Chapter 4: Back to the Burrow. The following Sunday, the Weasleys arrived to pick up Harry, though not in the way the Dursleys had expected. Mr. Weasley, in his misguided attempt to make the Dursleys comfortable, had connected their electric fireplace to the flume network. The result was chaos. The Dursleys' boarded-up fireplace exploded, showering the pristine living room with dust and rubble. Fred and George Weasley tumbled out, followed by Ron and finally Mr. Weasley, who looked around the destroyed room with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. "That's better," he panted, brushing dust from his long green robes. "Ah, you must be Harry's aunt and uncle." Uncle Vernon, his face purple with rage, seemed beyond words. Aunt Petunia was hiding behind him, peering around his massive frame with horror. Harry, trying not to laugh, quickly gathered his trunk and Hedwig's cage. As they prepared to leave, Fred and George accidentally dropped some brightly colored toffees. Dudley, unable to resist, snatched one up and ate it before anyone could stop him. Seconds later, Dudley's tongue began to swell, alarmingly, growing longer and longer until it was several feet long. Aunt Petunia screamed, trying to pull the purple tongue out of her son's mouth, while Uncle Vernon roared and threw ornaments at Mr. Weasley. Amidst the pandemonium, Harry was ushered into the fireplace. With a last look at the chaotic scene, he shouted, "The burrow!" and was whisked away in a whirl of green flames. As he spun past countless fireplaces, Harry couldn't help but grin. His summer was finally looking up, and the adventure was just beginning. Chapter 5: Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. The burrow was a hive of activity when Harry arrived, tumbling out of the fireplace and into the warm, cluttered kitchen. Mrs. Weasley enveloped him in a bone-crushing hug before turning to scold Fred and George for their Tauntaun toffee prank. As Harry settled in, he noticed an air of secrecy surrounding the twins. They were constantly whispering and disappearing into their room explosion, occasionally rattling the house. Ron explained that they were developing products for their joke shop idea, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. One evening, as Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who had arrived a few days later, were decorating the garden, they overheard an argument between Mrs. Weasley and the twins. "No more of this nonsense," Mrs. Weasley's voice carried across the yard. "You're to get rid of all those ridiculous inventions this instant." Fred and George emerged from the house, looking mutinous. As they joined the decorating efforts, they confided in Harry about their dream of opening a joke shop. "We've got loads of ideas," Fred said enthusiastically, "and a bit of startup gold, thanks to you, Harry," George added with a wink. Harry remembered the Triwizard winnings he'd given them at the end of last year, feeling a mix of excitement and guilt. He hoped Mrs. Weasley wouldn't find out he'd funded their enterprise. Chapter 6: The Portkey. The day of the Quidditch World Cup arrived, bringing with it an atmosphere of feverish excitement. The Weasleys, Harry, and Hermione woke before dawn, stumbling sleepily out of the house with their backpacks. Mr. Weasley led them on a long trek through the misty fields, explaining they were to use a portkey, an object enchanted to transport wizards from one spot to another at a prearranged time. As they climbed Stowshed Hill, they encountered Cedric Diggory and his father. Cedric, a handsome Hufflepuff student, greeted them warmly. Harry felt a twinge of jealousy, remembering how Cedric had beaten him at Quidditch last year. The portkey turned out to be an old boot at the top of the hill. As they all touched it, Harry felt a jerk behind his navel, as if a hook had suddenly yanked him forward. The world dissolved into a whirlwind of color and sound. They landed in a deserted stretch of misty moor. Ministry of Magic officials directed them to their campsite, where Mr. Weasley struggled humorously with Muggle money and camping equipment, as they set up their magical tent small on the outside, but with a full interior including a kitchen and bunk beds. Harry marveled at the Wizarding World's ability to always surprise him. Chapter 7: Bagman and Crouch. The campsite was a bustling hive of magical activity. Witches and wizards from all over the world had gathered, their tents adorned with flags and magical decorations. Harry, Ron, and Hermione explored, meeting old school friends and observing the festive atmosphere. They encountered Ludo Bagman, head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, who was taking bets on the match. Bagman, a former Quidditch player himself, was jovial and excited about the upcoming game. Later, they met Mr. Crouch, Percy's boss at the Ministry. Crouch was the opposite of Bagman, stern, rigid, and seemingly humorless. The contrast between the two Ministry officials was stark, hinting at the diverse personalities within the Wizarding government. As evening approached, the excitement in the air became palpable. Vendors appeared, selling merchandise and magical souvenirs. Harry bought omnioculars for himself, Ron and Hermione brass binoculars that could replay action, slow everything down, and provide play-by-play breakdowns. With the stadium now visible, a gigantic structure of gold, walls and seats, the group made their way towards it. The anticipation built with every step, the roar of the crowd growing louder as they approached the greatest spectacle in the Wizarding world.